All right. Hey, everybody. It's Michael Shermer. It's time for another episode of The Michael Shermer Show. Here we go. Great topic today, cults. One of our favorites here. My guest is Ashlen Hilliard, the next generation of cult intervention specialists whose work has been featured in prominent media outlets like Hulu, NewsNation, Huffington Post, and BET+. The public remains fascinated by cults, and in her show, she has a live show coming up this fall. We'll be releasing this shortly before the first episode, or I guess the first event happens. I'll tell you the cities in just a moment. But the show is called The Psychology of Cults, in which she explores the psychology of these destructive groups. We'll get into how you define a cult in just a minute. But also the individuals who become entangled in them and what you can do about it if you're one of them, or if you're a family member or friend or significant other of somebody that's caught in one of these things. So what do? You turn to Ashlen. Okay. Her early interest in the dynamics of belief and influence was ignited by her upbringing in Utah. Okay, there's a clue. Where she was surrounded by a unique blend of culture, religion, and history. Yes, we have discussed the Church of Latter-day Saints here many times on this program. This curiosity drew her back to Utah after college, where she worked as a case manager, supporting individuals exiting diverse Mormon fundamentalist polygamous communities across the West. This challenging and sometimes dangerous work, helped her become a fierce advocate for survivors. In 2022, Ashlen founded People Leave Cults. That's the name of her group, People Leave Cults, offering intervention and recovery sources for survivors and concerned loved ones. As one of the few cult intervention specialists in the country, Ashlen consults with a team of experts to develop personalized intervention strategies for families that have a loved one involved in a range of coercive situations, including cults, gangs, domestic violence, trafficking, and violent extremism. Yeah, I remember back in the 90s, there was the Cult Awareness Network was the big group. And they would actually go in and like kidnap somebody, like an adult, and lock them up in a hotel room and make them watch videos.
Yeah,
I don't think that's
deprogramming. No, it was terrible. It was awful. Not good.
Okay, and Ashlen has also served as director of events for the International Cultic Studies Association, the ICSA, organizing regional and international events, workshops, and conferences. All right, here's the cities she's going to be visiting starting October 8th: Jacksonville, Florida; Newberry, South Carolina; Huntsville, Alabama; Bristol, Tennessee; Charleston, West Virginia; Stroudsburg, Pennsylvania; Morristown, New Jersey; Stamford, Connecticut; Concord, New Hampshire; Buffalo, New York; Columbus, Ohio; Pontiac, Michigan; Cincinnati, Ohio; Chicago, Illinois; Indianapolis, Indiana; Cleveland, Ohio; and finally, she makes it to the left coast, Livermore, California, where I live, and she lives in Portland, Oregon. Nice to see you, Ashlen. Sorry for the long introduction, but
I'm sorry for the long introduction. Quite a bio you had to read there, but it's so nice to meet you. Thank you for having me on.
Yeah, so I mentioned the kind of early history of this. So I guess let's just start off with, what is a cult? How would you know if somebody's in one?
Sure. I appreciate the question. And honestly, we have so many more resources as to understanding what cults are now, thanks to media. There's a lot of documentaries that we can watch and, books we can read with survivor accounts. But I think a lot of people still don't quite know what a cult is, even with all this added information. And I think in some people's minds, maybe a cult is defined as something that they see as weird, wrong, or bad, because they simply don't believe the same thing that maybe I believe. But actually, amongst scholars in the field, there isn't one agreed upon definition as to what a cult actually is. And I think that's important for people to know. We have a lot of really good definitions. Obviously, cults, I think some people think that you have to have a cult leader in order to be considered a cult, and that's actually not true. A cult can be a group or movement exhibiting a great or excessive devotion to some person, idea, or thing. And it employs unethically manipulative techniques of persuasion and control, powerful group pressures, and the whole purpose of what a cult does is it's a promotion of total dependency on the group And it's designed to advance the goals of the group's leaders to the actual or possible detriment of members, their families, and the community. So the goal of what a cult does and how it operates is over a period of time through the exertion of coercive control, it removes your autonomy, right? And that's a much longer, sinister process than I think people realize. No one willingly joins a destructive cult or destructive group. And that's not typically why they end up in them in the first place. And so cults, it's a confusing thing still today to the public. And I think what the term cult has been turned into is what psychiatrist Robert J. Lifton calls a thought terminating cliche. It's a label that can be used to shut down higher levels of thinking, critical judgment. It's kind of like labels, even in political parties. For example, like woke, or the term liberal or Republican or Democrat. Some of these like terms can just be used as labels, and they could be used also as judgmental labels to sort of shut down conversation. And the term cult can be the same. If you have a loved one who you suspect is in an abusive group, I always tell families, take the word cult out of your vocabulary because it's not going to get you anywhere in actually communicating with your loved one and figuring out what's going on. It can actually be a very judgmental term. And what that can cause for someone in a group is they're going to want to prove you wrong, why it's not actually a cult, right? And they may dig their heels in and go in even deeper. So we don't even have a list, even experts, as to like what groups count as cults and don't count as cults, right? Because half of it, sure, is definitional. We can look at what aspects of a group is harmful. But the way that I like to look at what a cult is and not is whether someone has a maybe cultic relationship with the group in question. So much of it is individual experience. Like, you may be in a group and someone else may be in a group, and you may have a really abusive time, whereas someone else may have a relatively benign experience and decide, hey, this isn't for me anymore, and then move on. And I think all of those experiences need to be honored for what they are. And so group experience is mostly what defines and drives defining a cult. I hope that makes sense. I know that
Yeah,
was a
that
rather
makes
long
total
explanation.
sense. It's
Yeah.
really quite individualistic in terms of the particular person's experience with a particular group. I'm fond of saying no one in the history of the world has ever joined a cult, right? They join a group they think is going to be good. Why would they join a cult? Nobody would, right?
Sure.
So if you think of like Nexium, well, this is, a group of women empowering empowerment in marketing and business. What's wrong with that? There's lots of groups like that, and those are good, right? So you do a few workshops and seminars, and maybe most of the people that did that, most of the women that did that, they got a lot of good from those experiences.
Totally.
And only a handful actually went all the way down to the road of getting branded and all that stuff.
Right.
Or like if you look at the history of Jim Jones's church, he migrated from Indiana to the Bay Area, San Francisco, in the 60s. And his church was very innovative, progressive, liberal, integrated. He was like one of the first people to integrate church in California. And this, they're manning the soup kitchens, helping the poor people. There's pictures of Jim Jones and Governor Jerry Brown in his first round as governor of California. It's like, wow, this guy's a community leader, right? And then, 20 years later, you're down in Guyana drinking the Kool-Aid, right?
Yeah.
So,
those are really great examples of like how these groups, people's experiences can be, benign. And then unfortunately, some people can lose their lives. And so what I do when I work with survivors is I love for them to define for themselves what the experience was for them. Some people prefer terms like high control group, or maybe they experienced religious trauma or spiritual abuse. Some survivors find the term cult really empowering because it provides them with a label to describe what happened to them. And then other people, because the term is so loaded, just prefer to use other terms, and that's cool too. So I always defer to what survivors label.
That's interesting because survivor uses the word cult as if to say, I was a victim of this mind control type organization rather than I made some bad decisions or something like that.
Totally. I think it could be a way to sort of be like, yeah, this thing happened to me. I was a victim of this and I survived this. And it can be very empowering for survivors. And it also, by looking at it through a cult lens, there's very specific resources and educational models to help someone understand what the heck happened to them when they were in these groups. Margaret Singer's Continuum of Influence, Robert J. Lifton's Criteria for Thought Reform. Like, all of these tools are associated with looking at a group through a cult-like lens. And I think that's why even when we work with families who have someone who's been impacted by trafficking, sometimes they come to us because the trafficking models are helpful, but they're like, I also discovered that this is a cult-like relationship that my loved one had with a trafficker. And they find cult models especially useful for them in an educational way to understand their loved one's experience. So it
what
can
do
be
you mean by
helpful.
trafficking? What are you talking about? Like sex trafficking or labor? Slave labor?
Both.
I see.
Both. Yeah.
You mean so maybe an immigrant joins some labor group to find work, and then 6 months later, a year later, they can't get out and they're financially dependent, and they end
Yeah.
up doing things, sex work or slave labor, just to keep alive.
Yeah. Absolutely. And not only to keep alive, but it's been instilled in them that if they move on from that they have done something wrong, that
Hmm.
it is their fault, that they will never be enough to achieve what the group promised them that they could achieve. And so it's really twisted in that sense, I think.
Hmm.
Um, yeah, so I not only work with survivors, and I've worked with survivors for 7 years who've left cults, starting in my early days working with survivors exiting diverse polygamous communities, but also I work with families who are like, hi, my loved one I think is in a bad situation. Can I talk to you about it? And do you have any strategies or advice as to what we can do?
Yeah. Yeah. Okay, let's come back to that in a moment. Were you yourself raised Mormon?
I actually wasn't,
Oh,
no.
okay.
My dad was military, and so that's how we
Oh,
ended
I
up out
see.
in Utah. It was our last move out there. But I was raised similar to Mormons in that I was raised in my own, it was a conservative fundamentalist Christian group. And so there was a lot of, like, parallels of how I was raised and how I noticed my Mormon friends were raised. We were very similar in so many ways and also very different. And it was a really, I guess, sort of reflective experience because I was seeing how they were trying to convert me, and simultaneously I was trying to convert them in like junior high. As I know that's not like a normal junior high school experience, but I was in one of the, I guess, extreme minorities in the state of Utah, in particular of where we lived. And from a very early age, what this did was it prompted me to get very interested in religion and culture and Mormon history. And it caused me to also be reflective about the religion that I was raised in the group that I was raised in, because the emphasis wasn't on that. It was me trying to learn how to navigate friendships and survive in Utah culture without being Mormon. But it also inevitably had me be reflexive of my own experience too. And so it was a very unique upbringing in that sense. Um, and still to this day, being raised with amongst Mormon friends, I have bumped into someone and we get along really well, and then I figure out that they're Mormon, and I'm like, "Oh, this makes sense." Like I, I naturally just really get along with Mormon culture, Mormon people because I was raised out there. So
Yeah. Well, I know quite a few Mormons, and these are the nicest people.
of
You would never
course,
say, oh, you're in a cult. Although I'd say before Mitt Romney was a presidential candidate, a lot of Christian evangelicals thought of Mormons
yes,
as cultish or cultish like. But then I think after Romney, it became more like, well, just the fundamentalist, polygamist
mm,
Mormons are the cult, but the rest are, they're kind of mainstream now. Just I don't know how long does it take for a small religious sect that's outside of normalcy for
yeah,
the society to become normalized, right? Maybe 50 to
yeah,
100 years, something like that.
yeah. It's a really good, I guess, philosophical question, to be honest. Yeah, culturally, such a unique group and experience, and also the history of Mormonism and all of that was so interesting to me at a
Well,
very young
it's
age. I was
new enough
exploring.
we can track the detailed history, whereas like
Yes,
Christianity and Judaism is lost in the mists of history. And so mythology kind of rules the day. But with Mormonism, it's like, well, we know exactly what happened. Here's the records, right?
Yeah, 100%.
Did you ever
100%.
see Julia Sweeney's monologue, Letting Go of God?
No,
Oh, you should watch this.
no.
Julia Sweeney is a former Saturday Night Live comedian back in the 80s. She played the androgynous character Pat, anyway, which is kind of prescient now. But so in her monologue, she talked about being raised Catholic in the Pacific Northwest and how much she loved it. And then anyway, she started reading books by Dawkins and Hitchens and me and others. And, just kind of decided, this is not really quite right for me. But then anyway, but the monologue opens with she's living in Hollywood as a screenwriter. And the Mormon boys come by her house one day with their starched white shirts and their bicycles. And she invites them in for tea and they have their niceties. And so then she goes, all right, give me your pitch, like it's a Hollywood pitch story, right? So they launch into the whole story about the whole story about Joseph Smith and the gold plates and the angel and the whole thing about who the Native Americans really are and so on. And so she stops and says, don't start with this pitch. This is not a good story for, to convert me here. But then she makes a lot of funny jokes about that. But then she says, being raised Catholic, if I had never heard Catholic dogma, about Jesus was born of a virgin, it seems really important to these people and all the other stuff that goes with it. I think this is equally crazy.
That's absolutely right. You raise a really good point. I actually talk about this in the show. We all have a set of what I like to refer to as fundamental assumptions about how the world works, right? With Christians, there's a Virgin Mary, there's Jesus, he was crucified, he rose on the third day. If you were explaining this, to someone, it certainly doesn't sound rational, but it doesn't matter to Christians because it does more for them than just a rational, it offers a place of belief and faith and understanding and how to see the world unfolding in front of them. And I think what makes cults so interesting is they take someone's sort of preset fundamental assumptions and maybe how you were raised or how you were parented or your culture, and they present a new set of fundamental assumptions. And that new set of fundamental assumptions about how the world really works or how relationships really work, that could be really interesting, especially for intellectual people to play with. Really smart people end up in these groups because they like to toy with these different ideas about, okay, maybe the world actually works this way or society actually works this way. And wouldn't it be better if we just all got on the same page on that, And so I think what makes cults so appealing to people is the introduction of new ideas as to how things in this world should be or should operate or how it is. And that's something that I think everyone can get behind and understand in terms of allure.
I've been trying out some new ideas on different kinds of truths. So if the preacher or the minister says, the church has a parking lot in the back, you can go see for yourself if that's true or not. But if the minister says, Jesus was 3 in 1 and 1 in 3 and the Father, Son, and Holy Ghost and so on and so forth, how's anyone going to check that? I mean, this is not an empirical claim.
Yeah.
So people just accept some dogmas or some statements as true-ish for our group. This is what we believe. I'm not claiming it's empirically true. It's just this is what we kind of goes with the package.
Right. That's exactly right. Yeah, that's a good way to describe it, honestly.
Yeah. Then the other thing is the practical aspects of what it does for you. I've told this story before about meeting Isaac Hayes, the great singer and Grammy Award winner, and the voice of Chef on South Park. Anyway, I met him at my best friend Michael Cole's Thanksgiving dinner. There he is sitting across from me, and I've read a lot about Scientology, and he was famously a new member of Scientology. And I just asked him, what does it do for you? Why did you join, and what do you like about it? Well, I'll tell you, Michael, I was, pretty much at the top of the game. I had everything, money, all the stuff that goes with rock and roll superstardom. And then I lost it all. I mean, I had, sex, drugs, all the bad stuff that comes with that lifestyle. And they helped me get out of that and start my life over. And my life is so much better now, thanks to them. To me, that was end of story. I'm not going to say, but that's a crazy cult, right?
Right.
I'm not going to say that.
No. Yeah. And I think it's really important for people to approach people who you think may be in a group that you see as controversial or you don't understand why they're in it, it's really important to be curious about their experiences. And I think they're, the thing with being in a high control group is you're going to have some really great highs, but you're going to have some really devastating lows at the same time. And sometimes if you appear to be recruitable, and not really in a sense that you would be willing to join, but if you're curious and open to what wisdom they want to share with you from what they've been learning, it can really give you an idea as to sort of where they're at in their timeline of cult involvement. Like, you want to sort of go on the journey with them. And I think if you don't have that open line of communication as to what they're getting out of it or what they're struggling with being in it, then it's going to be really hard to know how to help them if they've closed off communication. And so certainly approaching this from a place of curiosity, I think, is so, so important. I remember helping a mom, and she had like 4 or 5 kids who left the FLDS back when I was a case manager. And I was helping her get settled into a temporary home, so establish some housing. She had found a job. And she turned to me and she said, I just want you to know, I still believe that Warren Jeffs is the true prophet of God. And as you know, Warren Jeffs is in prison for, child rape and really bad things. And that, of course, can send chills down your spine, right, when someone says that. But it wasn't my job to at all question that. I said, you know what, that doesn't matter to me, because what matters to me is making sure that you have housing and that your kids are taken care of. Because that was the reason why she actually left the FLDS. It wasn't because she was, questioning the belief system. It was more so just her kids weren't getting the resources they needed to thrive. And that was what was important to both of us at the end of the day. And I think she was really surprised at my answer. I think she was expecting me to be like, well, maybe we can't help you or push back, because that's what she has been told about outsiders, right? That they're not going to understand you, or maybe they're going to report you, or, all these things. And I just told her, like, you believe that? It doesn't matter to me. Like, I'm here to make sure that you're okay. And that's something that the community wasn't doing for her. And I knew for her to get to a place to actually consider, reflect about her life and her experiences and her beliefs, she had to first feel safe and secure. And so that was my goal.
Interesting. So maybe that's one distinction between a cult and a religious group, is that if you quit or you leave, they don't abandon you or disown you or make you homeless.
Totally.
If you leave in a regular Mormon church, say, or Catholic, if you're a Catholic and quit, you're not going to be homeless because your community and parents and everybody has disowned you. Whereas maybe in the FLDS or other tight groups, that is the consequence.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I have a lot of people who are like, how do I know if I'm in an abusive church? And I think one of the things that I tell them is, if you decide to leave that church, would they wish you well? Would they say, stay in touch, we'd love to still see you? Would your friendships be severely disrupted? Would they make an announcement that you're now disfellowshipped and you're leaving? Because I think abusive churches see themselves as synonymous with, well, our church is the only way to get to God, get to heaven, because we're the most biblically correct, right, out of all the other groups. And that's when it becomes really culty and really abusive. And that's when people can lose their entire community. And support system is when they want to advocate and do something they've determined is best for them, but it's held against them. Or they're told that, well, they're not believing enough, or, it's made to be their fault. And then they are punished for it. And groups can certainly do a really good job of punishing people.
Yeah. Well, again, you can broaden the term too widely. The Catholic Church is not a cult. The U.S. government, the U.S. Army is not a cult. Or, I had Steve Hassan on the show. I love Steve's work, but, this is his last book, the cult of Trump. It's like, well, something close to 80 million Americans voted for Trump. You're telling me they're in a cult? I mean, come on.
Yeah.
That's too broad a term.
I have a hard time with that. And I know Steve too. I have a hard time with that because it's like, again, we're assigning a label to maybe someone who thought that they're in rural Louisiana and they thought that maybe their egg prices would be cheaper, and that was what drove their decision to vote. And maybe they aren't full-blown MAGA or anything, but maybe
Right.
at that point in time, they really just wanted things to be cheaper, and that was what he was promising. And so I I have a lot of empathy for those people, to be honest.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
and I just yeah, I agree. I agree with you on that. I think it's quite a large. I don't wanna, like, lump people into these
Right.
categories, you know?
Right. Right. Yeah, it does come down to those individual characteristics. So let's go through some of those. I made a list here, but I think of it like the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual of
Mhm.
what constitutes a mental disorder.
Sure.
They have a list. You don't have to tick every single box, but the way they do it is
Yeah.
like if you have 12 of the 24, then you are possibly depressed or anxious, or you're this bipolar or whatever it is. And it very much depends on the individual. So veneration and inerrancy of the leader, dissent is
Mhm.
discouraged, the belief in absolute truth and absolute morality, in group, out group mentality, we're right and the others outside are wrong, ends justify the means, leads to members doing things they would have considered reprehensible or unethical before joining the group, like getting branded in your crotch,
Mhm.
deceit and hidden agendas. They don't always tell you what's going on. Financial and or especially sexual exploitation. This was my partner Pat Lindsay, who started Skeptic magazine with me. Her definition of a cult is when old guys get to have sex with young women who would otherwise
Mhm.
not have any interest in them.
Mhm.
Right?
And that honestly makes up such a small percentage. Of course, that can happen in groups, and we've seen it
Yes.
happen, but that I think people assume that that's what the majority of
Right.
cults are doing, and it's actually a very small percentage. Yeah.
Mind altering practices like meditation, chanting, speaking in tongues, denunciation sessions, debilitating work routines. Again, some of that's all right. I guess it's the degree to which
Yeah.
it controls you, something like that, right? This one's a big one, right? Isolation from friends and family. Why do they do that? They don't
Mhm.
want the person to get an external check on reality.
Yeah, but also, I think it's something much deeper than that, and that's people within cults form, trauma coerced attachment,
Ooh, what's that?
with the group or the leader.
Hmm.
So, as you know, which is basic attachment theory, you have healthy
Oh,
attachment where you
right.
feel like you can, go to this person if you need anything, but you also have flexibility to go to other people, and that's considered okay and healthy. You have unhealthy attachment where you're meant to feel like you can only go to someone and you get in trouble if you try to go to anyone else. That's unhealthy attachment. What cults do with trauma coerced attachment is they originally make you feel like you can come to them and they're your ultimate source of safety and comfort. You feel loved, you feel safe with them. And then the greatest source of comfort over a period of time then becomes your greatest source of threat. And
Mm.
that leaves in your brain this sort of double bind, the psychological double bind, because you were used to coming to them from a place of safety. And then over a period of time, when they're asking more of you to the point where you're harming yourself, you're not able to listen to your own needs and regulate, you're confused and you're still like going to them for what you need and things like that. And everyone else has been sort of cut off around you. And so it really can leave the brain in this double bind. And it's also what makes it so hard to leave cults once you're in them, or so hard to leave domestic violence once you're in it. It's like it takes people a lot of sort of attempts or times in which they try to leave and then they end up going back and then they leave, go back because these memories get brought up of, well, the person I met wasn't this. So maybe they'll change. Or the cult that I'm in now, or they wouldn't see it as that, the group that I'm in now didn't start like this. So maybe they'll change, or the leader will change. And that doesn't happen. And so it creates this really difficult bond through coercive persuasion over a period of time.
That is so interesting. I've never heard that. That is really insightful. So
Yeah.
it's not just a matter of financial dependency, it's more also emotional dependency. Why don't battered women leave their abusive husbands? You often hear, well, because then where are they going to live, pay the rent? And so it's a lot more than that.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Absolutely. They've been made to feel like it's their fault. Um,
Oh, right. Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah, and then they can change, right? So, what is the core nature of a group or a person? Perhaps the group is both. Maybe they do some good things, and they have these other abusive things also that
hmm
maybe only the inner members see or whatever, something like that. Maybe it's more complicated.
Yeah, I think groups teach you to look at things through a very black or white lens, right?
Mm.
And what I encourage is when I talk to survivors who've been through these systems is they're left feeling extremely conflicted about how to view their past experiences because the friendships they made, some of them were amazing.
Mm.
And, some of the people were maybe great or the nicest people they've ever met. And at the same time, they were maybe being financially exploited. And what I like to sort of give them permission to do is accept that both can be true.
Mm.
It could be true that you experienced some good friendships for a time, you felt loved for a time, you felt safe for a time, but it could also be true that the group became abusive and you had to leave. Both of those can exist simultaneously, and it helps them sort of break out of that black and white, I guess, mode of thinking. Um, yeah, and that's also what makes group involvement so confusing.
Okay, let's say I have an adult child. I do, but hopefully this won't happen to her because she's been raised about this around this stuff. But let's just say all of a sudden I'm ghosted, and they're part of this group. I kind of have some idea of what's going on. I feel like he or she has been being exploited. I've
Mm.
talked to him or her about it. I wrote letters, emails, and so on. And then all of a sudden they just cut off communication with me. I call people, leave cults. I get you on the phone. What do I do? All right. So where do we
Yeah.
start?
Well, I think a good place to start is what you simply just stated. I think it's important to consult with experts on this stuff. Um, and if I'm not the right person, I certainly would want to point you towards someone in my network who is a better fit. Um, Typically, when it comes to situations like this, there is a lot of information that maybe a family knows of what's going on. And then there's a lot of information that we don't know.
Hmm.
And the trick to being a family member in the circumstance is when our brains are anxious, they like to fill in the blanks. And sometimes people assume that if their loved one is involved in a group and all of a sudden they start like ghosting, that means that something really bad is happening. And our brains can kind of take those ideas and run with it. Now, that could actually be true and something that's possible and what's going on. But at the same time, sometimes we talk about, if you have someone in a group, you want to almost treat them like they have like a high level exec position at like IBM because groups demand so much of your time. And you want to create windows of opportunity where maybe you can like see them, meet up with them. Hey, you're welcome to come to dinner on this date. But you also don't want to add to their plate more responsibilities. And then you don't want them to feel guilty for not being able to make it to a certain occasion or thing. And I realize that can be hard because sometimes that looks like a missed birthday, right? That can look like a thing that could actually hurt our feelings. But cultivating the relationship in any way possible is one of the most important steps to knowing how to help and to also knowing what's actually going on, right? We may have ideas of what's going on, but there may be a lot that we're filling in the blanks about. And so it's my role as a consultant to identify the information that we still need to know more of and figure out, okay, how can we obtain that information? Um, and there's a lot of former members of groups out there who certainly can post things online about how bad the group is. But I also want to know the individual's experience. I would want to know your daughter's experience, right? And we would want to talk to you and see how much she shared with you about her experience. What are the guardrails where she's like, I'm unwilling to go here or disclose this?
Hmm.
Because that can also tell us a lot as well. So really it's sort of a information ungathering place, a fact finding place. And sometimes as families, it's letting off the gas of texting them every day, writing them every day. Again, that could put such a time strain or a feeling of guilt on them that they can retreat inward. Um, and so sometimes we even have to look at strategy as to like, okay, how much are you reaching out to them? Um, and are they even opening your messages? Right. So these are all things that we take into account.
And if the child is an adult child, that is not a minor, there's only
Yeah.
so much a parent or family member can do anyway, right? Legally.
Well, certainly the era of deprogramming ended for a very good reason. It was coercive, abusive, and terrible. And it would play off of families' desperation to, quote unquote, remove their child from an environment. Parents sometimes think because deprogramming is like a thing that they can look to, they think that if that person were to simply just stop attending a group, then they would be, I guess, like safe. But it's much more complicated than that. Group influence and group belief can go on for a long period of time. Someone may be physically out of a group, but mentally still applying some of those frameworks that they learned in the group. And then something we also worry about is cult hopping. People get used to a specific environment of high control. They leave that environment and then they may end up in another group without intending to because it's a familiar pattern
I
for the
see.
brain.
Cult
So
hopping, that's a great term.
cult hopping. Yeah, it happens all the time. And it's also why people who've been in abusive relationships can end up in another abusive relationship.
Mm.
It's not because they want to, it's because your brain recognizes familiar patterns. And some of that may feel comforting at times.
So obviously, don't tell your loved one, you're in a cult and you've lost your mind for joining.
No,
That's not going to do
not
it.
at all.
Is it better
Not at all.
to ask questions, just tell me what's going on, or can you tell me what you get out of it?
Yeah.
What's your day
y-
like every day?
Yeah.
Well,
We
why are you?
certainly like we certainly want families to come at it from a perspective of benign curiosity.
Mm,
We want to be curious without being too probative. We don't want them to feel like they're on trial where we're, really trying to grill out of them. Who do you hang out with? What's your schedule? How many hours are you spending? How much money are you donating? We certainly don't want them to feel that way. But we want to have the kind of rapport with them where we're curious about what they're getting out of the experience and what's going on. And the reason for that is because the data shows, and it's not perfect data, 80% of people leave cults on their own.
mm,
So what we don't know though is that after 3 months, 6 months, 16 years, that's dependent upon individual experience. And so when someone reaches a low point in their involvement and they need to talk to somebody, we want them to remember, oh, I can go to Michael because I know Michael was curious about my experience and I don't feel like Michael's going to tell me, hey, I told you so.
mm,
No one wants to feel like they made a bad choice, that they were
mm,
deceived. And I think what sometimes happens is the families unknowingly do some damage when their loved one's in a group because they're like, we've warned you about this and we're worried about this. And it's a very judgmental, fear-based place. So the loved one doesn't feel like they could come to the family and say, hey, I decided to leave. Like, because maybe they sense the family will say, well, we told you so. And, that's it, it's not helpful. And so my work with families, I try to shift families to more of a curious approach. And sometimes that's not the initial conversation. I don't expect families to be perfect with this stuff because how are we supposed to know? It's not like we're taught in school. Here's
mm.
what you can do. I wish there was more teaching in school about this stuff, but um, sometimes that means families apologizing and saying, "Hey, our first conversation on this wasn't great, and we'd like to make that better." Sometimes it may look like, "Hey, can we go to a service with you?" So like show that you're actually interested in stepping into their world a little bit. But if you're going to do that, you also have to be able to remain chill.
Mm.
Like you got to remain like cool, calm, and collected if you're going to go do something like that.
Mm.
But it can signal trust to that person, like, "Hey, I'm actually interested in, like, what's going on in your life."
I wonder if there's parallels with things like addiction. Like, do you have a gambling addiction or or alcohol addiction or porn addiction or whatever? I guess in part the answer is, well, how does it affect your life? I mean, as I'm fond of saying, if you get fired from your job and your spouse
Yeah.
leaves you and takes the kids, well, you probably have a problem. But if you have one drink a night, and your job is fine, your marriage is great, well, then maybe you don't have a problem. So maybe it's a degree of to what extent it harms you versus it doesn't do harm or even helps.
Yeah, so the lens that I like to look at this through is that of mental health. And when it comes to defining someone who is in, who has good mental health is this group or influence affecting your ability to have relationships with friends or family, contribute to the community in a meaningful way, whether that's through work or interaction or volunteer work, and also isn't to your own detriment, your belief or the group or influence. And so I like to look at it through that framework. I think like someone's involvement in a group may not mean that they've cut off all their family or they're not working. But the cases, where that is a bad thing is when it has affected their mental health. Maybe there's more paranoia. Maybe they have isolated from family. Maybe they're struggling at work. Um, these are more like indicators that, okay, maybe we work with the family and come up with some communication strategies and like a plan. So I agree with you on that. There's a whole spectrum.
Maybe even asking, how is this helping you? Or I mean, I see you lost your job, or you're destitute and broke, and your significant other left you. I wonder if maybe this wasn't the best move. Or
Hmm.
even that sounds a little snarky, I guess, the way I just said
Yeah,
it. But
yeah.
I don't know
I was about to say that
what the right
it
language
probably.
is.
Yeah, I think practicing some neutral phrases is really helpful, so that when you're in the moment, you have some things that you can reach for. I
Hmm.
know, like one of my mentors, Pat Ryan, he's been doing this work for over 35 years with families, and he told there was this husband and wife who was involved in a she was involved in a group, and she was giving a lot of money and time and was being abused. And he recommended that the husband just say, honey, you did your best. Like you gave it your best shot, and then nothing else.
Oh wow.
And she was at that low point, and he said he did exactly that. He said, honey, you gave it your best shot. And she said, you're right. Will you come help me get my stuff from the group?
Wow.
And so it just, sometimes less is more in those moments. It's like recognizing the hard work that she put in without saying, you know, maybe we better do something about this. She came to her own conclusion for sure.
Interesting. Well, that probably is the ultimate solution because go back to deprogramming for a minute. That suggests there was programming in the first place. Well, what does that mean? I mean, I know people that watch Sean Hannity and Fox News all day, every day, and I know people that
Hmm.
watch Rachel Maddow and
Yeah.
MSNBC all day, every day. They give money to the Democratic Party or the GOP.
Hmm.
They put in time. But no one would say, "Oh, you're in a cult." No, no. But at some point, they're programmed, to believe that the liberal values are the right ones or the conservative values are the right ones. How is
Hmm.
that different?
Hmm. Hmm. It's a great question. I think like it's a lot deeper than like deep held beliefs in something. Certainly there could be a devotion to beliefs that can be harmful if it interferes with like how you see the world around you. Like are you a Democrat who's willing, for example, to like still communicate and interface with a Republican?
Right.
Like that these it's part of like what, builds healthy communities is it's not just having different viewpoints, but also I I think also being willing, like, are we in a place where we can still think for ourselves and also think outside of the label of a party, for example? Or do we feel like we have to think exactly what the party is thinking, or else we won't belong anymore, or else we'll be ostracized, or else we'll be punished for it socially or by friends or family? So pretty complex questions we're asking here. It's good.
Yeah, well, I mean,
This stuff is very nuanced. I think it's important to
Yes.
communicate. It's like that
Right.
when it comes to cults and beliefs, it's extremely nuanced. And I think if you have a loved one and you're looking for support, um, it's good to have a solid reason. It's not just, hey, they're involved in this group. Um, if they're coming to a consultant, they're like, hey, we may need some like family consulting strategy. It's like if you believe someone is in a cult and they're being harmed, like we have to have a damn good reason for getting involved in
Mm.
someone's life. Like there's ethics surrounding that as well, right? Um, yeah.
And do we have any data on who's more or less likely to join a cult or become part of a dangerous group like that? I mean, like personality characteristics or gullibility or how they were raised or whatever?
Yeah. I mean, like some of this is anecdotal just through observing people who have left groups and who are in groups. What is really interesting is when it comes to altered states, we do know that people who tend towards creative brain, more creatively minded, are more likely to be more easily driven into altered states, right, of
Mm.
consciousness.
Yep, that's right.
Um, it's really interesting in that cults like to recruit the best and the brightest among us, because not everyone can just hang or have the money to give.
Mm.
So they target really smart, sometimes wealthy people. Um, and I remember like Pat Ryan was telling me back when he was in transcendental meditation, he was doing TM with like Nobel Peace Prize winners.
Hmm.
I mean,
Yeah.
like, I think people assume that you end up in cults because you're gullible or because you're not intelligent. And really, it could be absolutely reverse that. Um, the way in which I describe people who join cults, a lot of the times is they're at sort of a transition point in life. People who maybe had a big event happen, like they just moved to a new state, or they're in college and they're coming into their own self-actualization phase. There's a reason why a lot of cults recruit on college campuses, unfortunately.
Mm-hmm.
Um, or maybe you just lost a loved one or you've been through a divorce. I mean, all of these things we've all been through at some point. Also marginalized communities. If you're low income, for example, you can find benefits to joining a group because they can provide you with food or temporary shelter. Um, I think about groups like Synanon. Synanon was like the most progressive, program back in the day for people who were addicted to drugs. Communities didn't know what to do with drug addicted folks. And Synanon was like, we'll provide you a judgment free zone of addicts helping addicts. We're going to help you get clean. And that went from a very positive thing to Synanon really went off the rails as years went on. And their leader took them to this dangerous, very dangerous place with how they were running
I forget
families.
the details of that one. That wasn't the Scientology, was it? Or was that Narconon?
No, you're thinking of Narconon.
Yeah.
Synanon, and there's a great documentary on HBO I recommend. It's called The Synanon Fix. And it really details like Synanon was like a program for drug addicted folks where they could stop in, started as just like community resource programs, stay on a couch, detox, and you'd have like addicts checking in on you, bringing you meals, looking after you. These people were really ostracized from societies. And that turned into the more funding that Synanon got, the more that the leader of Synanon completely went off the rails.
Mm.
And then it turned into years down the line, not even being recognizable for how it started. He was experimenting with raising children with different types of parents who weren't their own, living communally, um, abuse in many, many forms. And so Synanon at first was a very positive thing for people. And it wasn't until later that it went off the rails. So certainly people at transition points who are really vulnerable um, are prone to ending up in groups like this.
Interesting. Yeah, you wonder if maybe these cult leaders themselves start off with good intentions and then they like the power and the power corrupts and then they become abusive sexually, financially, and so on because the opportunities are there unless they're a highly ethical person like the Dalai Lama, they just, it's just hard to avoid that temptation.
Yeah. I mean, and it can also be maybe you are a sociopath and a narcissist. And,
Yeah.
I think it's also extremely diverse, right? And reasons why people decide to abuse and harm and become power hungry. I think it could be psychopathy as well as maybe what's being handed to you and the power you're grabbing. Um, and I also want to mention people end up in cults because sometimes they're born into them. Sometimes
Okay.
they
Right.
sometimes they don't even have a choice. Maybe your parents were first gen in a 60s movement and you were born
Yes.
into a group and you had a very strange childhood because of it. But it really, really leaves an impact because it affects the way the parents parent you, how you were raised socially, your beliefs, even in maybe the supernatural. I mean, you name it, it affects everything. And I like to say, people who were born and raised in group systems, this stuff is in your DNA. And I mean, it's in some ways not very different than, let's say, your like third generation strict Catholic upbringing,
Mm-hmm.
right? This stuff is in your DNA. You're born maybe holding a rosary. I don't know, but this stuff is in your DNA. And if you decide to leave that system, it takes a lot. It takes a lot.
Yeah, like
Yeah.
Tara Westover's memoir,
Yes.
Educated.
Educated. Yeah.
How would you even know what the world is like if
Of
that's all you've ever
course.
seen is this little group?
Of course. Yeah,
Which
and
is why
sometimes
education's good.
yeah, and sometimes leaving a cult is it also means for these people who were born in leaving your family, and no
Mm-hmm.
one wants to do that, and so
Mm-hmm.
it's not that, and high control groups make it to where you can't have both. You can't have a life that feels good for you and also have your family. They make it you gotta pick us or them. It's that in-group, out-group thing that you
Right.
mentioned. Yeah.
Well, it's the best argument I've heard against polygamy because my libertarian tendencies is to think, well, what business is it of mine to tell consenting adults who they want to marry or how many people they want to marry? But it's not like that in the real world. These young girls are raised that that's what they're going to do. They don't know any different.
It's very different than consenting to I mean, yes, you're correct in that you're born in a system. These young girls, some of them would run away from home because they're about to get trafficked to another state where it's legal to marry your first cousin,
Right.
or they're about to get married to their uncle in secret, right? That's being arranged by the family and they're only 16. That isn't consent. That
Right.
isn't an adult making a decision. That is child marriage. That is
Right.
coercive. It's unethical. It's, illegal. So that's the difference between, you know, religiously driven polygamy, like what's going on in the FLDS, and adults consenting to something like polyamory, right? Or like open relationships. It's a very different world. Very different world.
Yeah. So, but that brings up to mind the question of, to what extent are you consenting if you have financial pressures on you? So, I had Rachel Moran on the show. She was
Mhm.
a former prostitute, now activist against prostitution.
Yeah.
What business is it of mine of consenting adults in a hotel room and they swap money for sex? Okay. But in the real world, actually, it's mostly destitute, poor women,
Mm.
sometimes underage, but often adults, but drug addicted or just impoverished, have no place to go, and so on. And they're not exactly making rational choices there out of
Well, and
desperation.
most often there's a pimp involved, right?
Yes, yes, right.
There's that power control dynamic. And so that's a cultic relationship that these vulnerable women are in.
She
Um,
says even in the European experimental models where like the women are unionized and
sure.
they control it or whatever, it's still pretty abusive because who owns the building that they're the hotel
Hmm.
building that they're going into, and when there's disputes about pay or services or whatever, who's catered to and who isn't. It's usually the guys that are catered to because they're the paying customers, right? And so it's hard to get around the abuse. And so
Again, if they're putting their needs above the welfare of
right.
these people, that's the coercive dynamic that can be at
Right.
play.
And then I had
Hmm.
another Brooke Ulrich on the show. She's a former sugar baby. Now she's written a
Hmm.
book against the whole sugar daddy, sugar baby thing.
Mhm.
It's sold, back to your promoting on college campuses, it's sold to these college age women that you could pay for your tuition.
Totally.
Yeah.
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 This was a site called Seeking Arrangements. Now it's just seeking.com. Not illegal, I guess, some of it. And so they keep it going. But that they recruit these women who are financially desperate. They're going to owe 50,000
Mhm.
bucks a year. Well, here you can get this rich guy to pay for it. But the problem is it almost never happens that way.
Yeah.
Right? Or even the OnlyFans like Ayala, who was famously making 50 to 100,000 bucks a month doing the cam girl stuff. But in fact, there's a Pareto distribution there. Where like 1% of the women make 99% of the money. Everybody else is making $100 a week or something doing this stuff.
Yeah. Well, and it's important. Again, you illustrate a very good point, and that's like people get involved in this stuff because of the idea that they can make money on their own terms. They can be financially very wealthy, and that works out for some people, but it may be a very top selective owners, right? It's very similar to MLM models, of course.
Yes,
Like if
right.
maybe you were one of the 20 people who got involved in Amway back when it first launched,
Hmm.
that's very different financially gain wise than people who try to get involved in Amway now.
Yes.
Um, so, but they, that promise is still there of like you can do this on your own terms. And if you're failing or if you're not doing it or if your friends and family are getting mad at you because you keep trying to sell them Amway products, like then what can sometimes be made to happen is you're told it's your fault. Like you're not following the protocol enough, you're not going to enough training meetings, you got to
Mm.
change your approach, like it's on you is how these groups make you feel. And that's not good.
Yeah,
It's not good.
no, no. If your customers are your family members and best friends who don't want to hear the pitch one more time,
Mhm.
maybe it's not a good model.
Yeah. Yeah.
So, okay, another kind of deep question on this is the subject of brainwashing.
Yeah.
Now, most of the people I've talked to about this, feel it's not that simple. You can't brainwash somebody. You can't program somebody to assassinate the president or do something that would normally be against their will. But of course, influence is real. So I guess the
Mhm.
question is somebody in some of these groups you've dealt with, do you see them as brainwashed, or they're just under high influence? Or, at what point does volition and
Yeah.
rational choice meld into something else?
Ugh. Great question. I love this question. It's such a good question. I think sometimes when people think of brainwashing, they think of, or sometimes people will say to me, like, I don't understand how someone just ends up, like, they're just brainwashed in to a group, right? And I'm like, well, that's not actually what happens. Like, someone may be influenced into a group, but very, very, very rarely is someone just like brainwashed into a group and that's why they join. Most people join on their own volition because of what's presented to them. And it's really positive. And it's not until much later in their sort of timeline or journey or roller coaster of involvement in a group that sort of what I refer to as like this mind meld happens. You're suffering for, it's like you're not suffering enough. And the more you suffer, it's actually for the good of the cause. And what's at one point was seen as a negative thing is now turned on its head to be a positive. Like you suffer harder, you try harder, you give more, even in your own detriment. But that's not the initial pitch. That's like not why people end up in groups. I think about the classic example of Patty Hearst.
Hmm.
Patty Hearst, you know, college aged young woman. She was a daughter of an heiress, and she was actually kidnapped by the Symbionese Liberation Army, the SLA. And Patty Hearst, it's not like she joined a group that she thought was promising something or offering something. She was physically kidnapped and held in a closet, sexually assaulted, wasn't allowed to leave the closet, and they would use torture techniques on her. They would play on a recording device, group ideology, on repeat, on repeat, on repeat, all day long, all night long. It only took about 2 weeks for her to start repeating group ideology. That is a classic example of brainwashing under really extreme circumstances. And it was only a few months later where there's that very classic picture of her holding the machine rifle
In the
and robbing a
bank.
bank along with SLA members.
With her
That
nom de guerre, Tanya.
Yeah, and she'd been given a new name of Tanya, right? So that, or we think about like prisoners of war, and what they endure. That is more typical of like brainwashing. When I think of brainwashing, and certainly people become manipulated and influenced within cultic groups, and I think that's very different than just being brainwashed into something, because that's so rare and so extreme. It can happen, but it's very extreme.
Yeah. Well, that's how that whole research program started in the 50s with the concern that the North Koreans and Chinese and Soviets were ahead of us in the brainwashing, mind control game. So we started doing research. So, a lot of that interesting research comes out of that. But so another topic I've been struggling with here and in my work on the show and so with lots of guests is, how gullible are we really? How irrational an animal are humans? You can go to the Wikipedia page and look under cognitive biases. There's over 200 of them. It's hard to believe anybody even gets out of bed or gets through a day of work without all these fallacies. Okay, so an influence on me on this was Hugo Mercier's book, Not Born Yesterday. So he makes the case, along with Gerd Gingerenzer, that Tversky and Kahneman and these guys, they pushed it too far. We're not that irrational. And that on most circumstances, most of the time, most people don't join cults, for example. And the problem is what's the base rate? Right? So Kahneman calls this base rate neglect. So you say, well, look at these people that join cults, and you can name them all. Okay. How many, out of how many? What's the base rate? How many people took the Scientology personality test and never joined? Probably 99% of people never join, right?
Yeah, totally.
So my deeper question is, these examples that we can name, Scientology or Jim Jones, the Heaven's Gate, all, just the batshit crazy stuff, NXIVM. But, how many women say NXIVM didn't do anything like that? Maybe there were hundreds or thousands, or people that took, Tony Robbins' self-help
totally.
group, and they loved it. They got a lot out of it. And, I often reference that Netflix documentary, I'm Not Your Guru, about Tony Robbins, which should have been called I Am Your Guru, because some people look up to him like that, but most people, they don't, right? So I don't know. What are your thoughts on that general question?
Yeah, it's a great question. Again, it's like it so illustrates the spectrum with this stuff, right? And I think about, I think at the end of the day, we're just animals in so many ways. I think about Robert Cialdini's work on influence, and I actually talk about that in the show. It's like we are more likely to listen and apply what someone's telling us if they're in a position of authority, or perceived authority. We're more likely to do what people around us are already doing. If people are pulling out their phones at a bus stop, we'll probably pull out our phone. Social proofing. Like, it's like reciprocity. Back in the day when Olive Garden was really a thing, they would leave these like really great little chocolate Andes mints, at your table, the server would, with the check. And research has shown that we're more likely to tip that person more because they gave us this gift of generosity, and we then feel like we need to reciprocate that. It's called reciprocity, right? You scratch my back, I'll scratch yours. So as humans, the way we've evolved, or however have you, we really are extremely easily influenced. And influence in of itself can be positive, and it can also be benign. There's a spectrum of influence. And Margaret Singer, who was one of the sort of foundation researchers alongside Robert J. Lifton of this field, talks about, she's got a continuum of influence that I encourage people to look up. It's really good, really detailed. Like, when does something turn from, it's like a teacher educating a third grade class on here's how to do a math equation. She's exerting influence. And that's a positive thing. We need to know how to do math. That's not bad. But when does it turn from positive experiences of influence to maybe something more like marketing, targeted ads, to something maybe that looks a lot more like totalism? And she's got a really great spectrum on that. So I highly encourage people look it up. So it really illustrates influence as a range. And as human beings, we respond to influence. And influence can be inherently really beneficial. And it can also be incredibly destructive. And I think these tools help us identify when it's gone off the rails or not. But listen, I know a lot about cults and influence, but I got scammed earlier this year. There
You
was an
did?
ad. I totally did.
What
This
happened?
stuff happens all the time. There was an ad on Instagram for a $10 rug sale. Okay. It got
Okay.
me. Yeah. I went to the site and whoever the people were, we've all heard of Ruggable. Like Ruggable is a
Mhm.
pretty well-known like rug brand. They made a complete duplicate of the Ruggable site. And it wasn't until after I had checked out that I realized from the confirmation email that I had gotten scammed and I had to call my bank and shut down my card. But let
Right.
me tell you, what got me was, and again, it's back to Robert's work on this stuff, is like, there's a limited time offer. There's only
Mhm.
72 hours left on this rug sale. And the price, I felt like I would never get that price ever again.
Mhm.
It was like that limited time deal. It's that scarcity principle. Like,
But
and that
how is that
that
any
gets
different
people.
than when I go on Travelocity to look up some flights and I get the immediate push notice there's only 3 more hours to buy this ticket at this price.
It's not any different. And it's also
Right.
not any different than than like groups being like, I have knowledge to impart to you and this is your chance. Like sometimes cult leaders or cultic groups, they present that limited time offer. Like, I'm in your area this weekend, this is your chance to see it. Or else you're not gonna, figure it out on your own. So it's really it's really not that different, right?
I've been
Um,
getting spam texts the last, I don't know, 6 months or so. Just
yeah.
like random, like, are we still having dinner next week?
Yes.
So I've
Yes.
been having fun with some of these. Like one of them,
Yeah.
I texted back and said, remember, we weren't going to talk for 2 weeks until the police cool down. It's like, wrong number. Or remember, I said to ditch the gun and hide the body. It's like,
That's
what?
so funny. That's so funny.
But I've
Yeah.
never carried it out long enough to know what the ask is. Are they going to
Yeah.
ask for money? Several
Yeah.
of them mentioned, my business is Bitcoin and investments. What's yours? And so
Mhm.
maybe there's like, if I'm like, I'm into Bitcoin too, then maybe there's an ask coming, but I've never gotten that far.
Yeah. Yeah. That's very funny. That's very interesting.
Yeah.
That's very
And,
interesting.
and of course, if they know it's probably some guy, but they sent a picture of some really good looking woman, right?
Mhm.
If the,
Yeah, of
as soon as they
course.
found out
Yes.
it's a guy they're
Yes.
dealing with, if I tell them that.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
Uh,
Totally.
yeah. So, oh
Yeah.
yeah, that's just too much. Okay. So your show, tell us a little bit about your show. What do you do? What's the
Yeah.
program?
Yeah. So it's actually a pretty interactive experience, which we're excited about. So I was approached by Right Angle Entertainment they sort of came up with this concept of expert touring shows. Last year they did, since true crime is so big, the
Hmm.
psychology of serial killers.
I had her on.
And yeah, okay, cool. Yeah, Dr. Rachel Tolles.
Yeah,
And
totally
she did,
super interesting.
yeah, and she did really great work. And so I'm the expert for the psychology of cults. And what I'm really excited about the program is, we've all seen documentaries on this stuff and like, but I wanted to make it an immersive experience for audiences, and I don't want to give too much away by saying that. But I will say I will have the opportunity to like walk people through from beginning to finish of someone joining a group to someone leaving a group
Hmm.
and really break down the steps and really break down the highs and lows and really like show people what that timeline of cult involvement looks like. And at the end, we get a solid 45 minutes of audience Q&A. You get the
Wow.
chance to like scan a barcode and like submit a question. A QR code. Barcode is for grocery stores,
That's right.
not a
QR code.
barcode. You get to scan a QR code, submit a question, and I am really excited to answer them and see what questions I get asked. So
Nice. What are some of the groups people ask about? I mean, it's just in general through people leave cults.
I mean, there's a lot of problematic, like, Eastern yoga guru communities still that exist. I think sometimes people think that that was a thing of, like, the '60s and '70s, but they're still alive and well today, where it's a really abusive guru situation.
Oh, right. There was that guy, Bikram yoga guy, right? The hot,
Totally.
yeah.
Yeah, yeah. So it's still very much so alive and well. And, I mean, all kinds of, uh also, like, extreme break-off sects of, like, Christianity, for example, that are, like, very, abusive in how it can affect how family systems operate, how children are raised in that environment, um, how much people wanna isolate and go into, like, doomsday prep mode, you know?
Mm.
Um, so I really just receive a whole spectrum of groups. I mean, throughout the 7 years I've worked with survivors, it's been anything and everything under the sun. You really don't get surprised anymore when a family's like, "This is my situation." But I think that's really good because they feel like I'm not getting so I'm not, like, taking their case and, like, "Oh, I'm fascinated by it." It's like, "No, yeah, it makes sense, like, your daughter, she's in an isolated community with this guy, and it's not good." Like, it's really groups just repurpose each other again and again and again.
Amazing.
Um, that nothing is really new, and you just kinda get used to hearing like, for me, it's just, like, a normal day at the office. But
Right.
then I maybe, like, talk to my friends at the end of the day, and I'm like, "I had this crazy case today, and, like, this is a little bit about it," and they're like, "What is your day? Like, what is your
Oh, so there's
like,
some
what is
new
your
ones
job?"
that even your colleagues haven't heard.
Oh, totally. I
Oh,
mean,
wow.
new groups pop up all the time,
Mm.
communities pop up all the time. Um, yeah, I mean, there's all kinds of groups that haven't been covered or exposed yet. Maybe they're small fish right now, but they won't always be, or maybe they're just like maybe it's a really toxic relationship, one-on-one relationship that has some cult-like elements to it. So it's very diverse, this stuff,
Oh,
and
yeah,
how it
because
can
in your
look.
bio mentioned domestic violence. Do you get calls about that? Like, I'm in this relationship I know I shouldn't be, and what do I do?
Yeah, mostly from families who are like, my daughter or son, child is involved in this relationship, and, like, we've consulted with domestic violence experts before and already, and, like, here's what we've tried, but we kinda wanna dig into this more from maybe, like, a cult-like relationship lens and see what you guys recommend and how we communicate with our loved one who's in this
Mm.
situation.
Mm.
So, that is sometimes something that happens. Yeah, for
Yeah.
sure.
Interesting. All right, Ashlyn. Well, you're doing really important work, and I'm glad you're doing this show. We will post in the show notes your
Thank
cities and
you.
where they can
Yeah.
click to get tickets and so forth. You should come back on and after your tour and talk about some of the more interesting and odd questions you get, because you'll probably get some
Honestly,
new ones.
I am the most excited about the Q&A. I've done a lot of
Right.
podcast interviews and I've been asked a lot of questions, but I really wanna be stumped. I wanna I have no problem in saying I don't know or I have
Right.
no idea. And
Right.
I'm really excited to see what the public has questions on right now. Like, I'm really excited to see the heartbeat of communities and, like, what people are wondering about or have questions about. So,
Yeah.
I'd be game for that. I think it'd be really
And
interesting.
then there should be a book in your future. We need more books on cults and stuff, so just
We
people
definitely
know what's
do.
going on.
I
Especially because a
know.
lot of the early stuff wasn't that good. Looking back now, I think stuff on
Yeah.
brainwashing and all that.
Yeah. All right. Thank you so much for having me.